Hi, my name is Brittany J. Jones. In this video, we are going to be sewing view C of my Know Me pattern ME2002. This view is a pair of pants, and I do highly recommend that you stitch up a quick muslin, 1, to make sure that you're cutting the right size, 2, so you do not cut into your good fabric until you're absolutely sure that these pants are going to fit, and 3, you'll be able to address any fit issues that you may have and go ahead and get them corrected on the muslin so that when you are sewing up your pants, you know that you're sewing a pair of pants that's going to fit you amazingly. I will be walking you through step by step to sewing view C of my pattern ME2002. Let's go ahead and review the supplies that we're going to need. Again, we're going to be sewing view C of my pattern ME2002. Remember that on the back of the pattern, we have a list of suggested fabrics if you would like to know what fabric would work best for the pants. These are not just denim pants. You can use denim, but you can also use cotton blends, linen blends, cord, and stretch wovens. You can even use twill. For notions, you will need one 7-inch zipper. You will also need one 5/8 of an inch button. Be sure to check out the finished garment measurements. They are printed on the tissue paper. That way you make sure that you're cutting out the right size. My pattern is available in 3 different sizes. It's available in Mrs. 10 through 18. It's available in women's 20W through 28W, as well as women's 30W through 38W. So just make sure that you're picking the right envelope for the size that you need. Let's review the pattern pieces that we will need to cut out to make view C of my pattern. We will need pattern piece number 5. This is the front for C and D, and we need to cut 2. We will need pattern piece number 6. This is the pocket. We need to cut 2 out of lining fabric. My fabric is fairly light, so I've just used the same fabric that I'm using for my pants for my lining as well. So again, make sure that you cut out pattern piece number 6 and cut 2 from your lining fabric. Pattern piece number 7. This is the side front. We need to cut 2. Pattern piece number 8, this is the right fly, and we need to cut 1. Pattern piece number 9, this is the fly facing. We need to cut 1 of fabric and 1 of interfacing. Pattern piece number 10, this is the back. We need to cut 2. Pattern piece number 11, this is the back pocket. We need to cut 2. Pattern piece number 12, this is the yoke back. We need to cut 2. Pattern piece 13, these are the carriers. We need to cut 1. Pattern piece 14, this is the right front waistband. We need to cut 2 of fabric and 1 of interfacing. Pattern piece number 15, this is the left front waistband. We need to cut 2 of fabric and 1 of interfacing. The last pattern piece that we need to cut out is pattern piece number 16. This is the back waistband. We need to cut 2 on the fold of fabric and 1 on the fold of interfacing. Once you have all of your pattern pieces cut out and you've transferred all of your markings and you cut out your interfacing as well, we can go ahead and get started sewing. I do want to show you all one adjustment that I made to my pant. As you can see here, pattern piece number 10, this is the back. I have cut here along my lengthening and shortening line, and I added 1 inch here. Also right here along my center back, this is going to be my stitching line, and I've graded that up because I don't need this extra fabric here in the back. So this is my stitching line here as opposed to this one. This is my line. It's a little bit at an angle. And this is what fits my body. So this is just an adjustment that I made. So I just want to show that that is a little of a bit of an angle that I've done. This measures 1.5 inches from the top, and I just angled it down here, tapered it down to nothing. I've added 1 inch right here along the lengthening and shortening line. I added that same inch on my front pattern piece so that everything matches when I put my pattern pieces together. If you would like some recommendations on fitting books, these 2 right here are my absolute favorite, especially when it comes to fitting pants. I use this one for every garment. Let's get started sewing. To begin, we're going to take our pattern piece number 5, this is our front, and we're going to pin out our pleat as well as our dart. So you should have transferred some pleat lines, and to pin these out, you want to bring your pleat lines together on the inside. So this is the wrong side of my fabric facing up. I'm just going to bring my pleat lines together. I have my circles transferred here, and I'm going to grab a pin. I'm going to poke through one here, and I'm going to bring it through the other. And and just pin that out. I also clip notches at the top of my pleat, and I'm just going to pin along my pleat line that I transferred. So I've done this one here the same. We're going to backstitch at the beginning and at the end right here along the pleat line. Before we go to the sewing machine, we can actually go ahead and pin out our dart. So I have my dart transferred as well along my front at the bottom. You want to bring that together, matching up your dart legs. So I'm just going to pin through one, make sure I go through the other, and pin that in place. I want to make sure that I match up the notches that I transferred at the top to make sure that my dart is even. And then I want to check and make sure I'm going through each side of the leg, and I'm not, so I'm just going to adjust, because you want to make sure that you have an even dart. Okay, so after we stitch our pleat, again back stitching at the beginning and at the end where your small circle is, you can go ahead and stitch your dart. You want to back stitch here at the widest part, stitch down to the point, and when you get to the point, we're not going to back stitch, we're going to leave some thread tails and tie a knot to secure the point of our dart in place. Let's go ahead and do our stitching now. Okay, I have my pleat stitched in place. After you have it stitched, you can press it toward the center of the pant. I also stitched my dart in place, so this is what the dart looks like on the outside. And I also pressed that going toward the inseam. Go ahead and press your pleat and dart in place, and once you have that finished, we can go to the next step, which is to work on our pocket, which is pattern piece 6. With pattern piece number 6, your pocket, you want to take it and line it up to your side edge like so. You should have transferred some dots. I have a small dot transferred here. Grab some pins and we are going to pin it in place. You want to pin your other pant pocket on the same exact way. We're going to start here at the top, back stitch at the beginning and at the end, and we're stitching in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. After we have the pocket stitched on, I have mine stitched here, we can go ahead and trim down our seam. Now that we have it trimmed, we can go to our pressing station. You want to press your pocket out. I like to do understitching on my front pockets just to make sure that everything stays to the inside. Even though we're going to do top stitching, I still like to do understitching. If you do not want to do the understitching, because it is totally optional, then you can just press your pocket out, turn it to the inside, and give it a really nice press. And then we will do our top stitching. Okay, I've just done my row of top stitching on my pockets. So now I'm going to go ahead and grab my side front, which is pattern piece number 7. And with right sides facing, this is the right side for this side here. We need to match up the pocket to the side front and start pinning around the curved edge of the pocket. Again, make sure that you match up your small circles, match up your notches, and pin in place. Okay, so I've just pinned right around the curved edge here. We're going to go ahead to the machine and stitch this in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then you can finish off your raw edge if you'd like. Okay, now that we have our side front sewn on, you can see I went ahead and finished off my edges with my serger here. So now we can turn everything to the inside. And now we can go ahead and baste the side edge here as well as the top edge here. You want to make sure that you match up your notches as well as match up the small circles that you transferred. Make sure that everything is nice and flat. Grab your pins and we can pin in place. Pin along the side as well. Now that you have it all pinned, we can go to the sewing machine and we can baste it in place. You want to do the same thing for your other front pant leg as well. All right, now that we have the side front basted along the top as well as the side, if you're following along with the pattern instructions, this is step 4. So now we can move on to step 5. So with right sides facing of our front pant legs, we're going to stitch between the large circle and the notch. I had to take a double look at my pattern because there is no notch. And here's another look at it. So on pattern piece number 5, the front, this is the large circle, but there is no notch here for us to stop at. So I am going to stitch between my large circle and I'm going to just stitch down an inch. That is what I'm going to be doing for my pin here. So I've measured down about an inch from this large circle. I'm going to put a pin here at the large circle. So I'm just going to back stitch here, stitch from the large circle to about an inch, inch and a quarter away from the circle. All right, so I've gone ahead and I stitched from the large circle about an inch, inch and a quarter away. So now we can move on to the next step, which is our fly facing. This is pattern piece number 9. You want to go ahead and fuse your interface into that. And I have finished off the raw edges with my serger. Make sure that you have your marking transferred as well as your notches. Once you have it all fused and ready to go, we can go ahead and place it onto our front pant like so. Grab some pins. You want to make sure that you match it up to your notches here that you transferred and pin in place. Now we can go ahead and stitch this from the upper edge down to the large dot. Make sure that you back stitch when you get there. After you have it stitched at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, then we can trim down our seam and we can press the fly facing out toward the seam allowance. Let's go ahead and stitch it in place first. Okay, I've gone ahead and pressed my fly out toward my seam allowance. So I have the seam allowance facing toward the fly. Now I'm going to go back and do a row of understitching right here along the fly. With understitching, you're stitching to the fly and attaching it to the seam allowance. You're not stitching onto your fabric. So I'm just going to stitch really close to my stitch. Again, just stitching on the fly, making sure that I catch the seam allowance underneath. Okay, now that I have the understitching done on the fly, I can turn this end to the inside and give that a press. And on the other opening, we can fold in along the fold line. I put a little snip up here along my fold line so we can fold in along that to the small dot that we transferred. So there was a large dot and a small dot. Mine has kind of moved away since I've been sewing, so I'm going to get my pattern back out and transfer that small dot. And then we can press in along the fold line as well as press in along the fly facing. Okay, so I've pressed in all of the edges. So over here, I pressed over along the fold line to the small dot, and I've just pressed in my fly facing on this side. The next step for us to do is to go ahead and grab our right fly, which is pattern piece number 8. We're going to fold it along the fold line with right sides facing, and we are going to stitch the lower edge of this together. So again, you want to go ahead and fold it so that it's right sides facing. You should have transferred a circle as well as notches. You can grab a pin and pin down here along the lower edge, and we can stitch this at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance right here along the lower edge. Let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, here's my right fly. I have it all finished. I stitched along the lower edge. I trimmed it, flipped it, turned it right side out, and then I finished off the edges here. You can stitch the edges and finish them off if you'd like. I made sure that I still had my marking transferred because we're going to need this in just a moment. So now the next step is for us to go ahead and grab our zipper. This is my zipper here. My zipper is a 9-inch zipper. The pattern only calls for a 7-inch, so I will have to trim off a little bit of this once we're done. But making sure that you have the right side of your pant facing up, we're just going to grab our zipper and we're going to slide it right here under the right front opening like so. Make sure that you have the front edge of your opening aligned with the zipper teeth, and if you do have a 7-inch zipper, make sure that you have the zipper stop right at the large dot that we transferred and started stitching at. Once you have it aligned like so, grab some pins and we can pin it in place. Alright, yours should look a little something like this. I have my front opening right beside the coils. Make sure they're not on top of the coils, but just right beside them. And now we can go ahead and base this in place. You want to base from the beginning all the way down to the large circle. Okay, now that we have our zipper basted in place, now we're going to grab the right front and I'm just going to slide this right up under it like so. As you can see, I have the raw edges so that they will match up to the raw edges on the inside. If it makes it easier, you can turn it to the inside to lay it in place. So again, this is the right fly, this is the zipper. I'm just going to place this right over top like so. And what we're going to do is we're going to match up the raw edges as well as our notches and the small dot, and we're going to pin it in place. I prefer to pin it along the right side. That way when I'm stitching, I can pull my pins out as I'm going. But again, if it helps, you can match everything up and just kind of look to make sure everything is nice and even on the inside of the garment. And then just grab your pins and pin everything in place like so. So again, I'm just matching it up on the inside, but I'm placing my pins on the outside so that I'll be able to see. And you want to make sure that you're matching up those notches in that small circle. So just take your time, place your pins, and get everything nice and even. Okay, I have my front fly pinned in place. So this is what it looks like along the inside. Everything is lined up with the raw edge. I've matched up my notches, matched up the top raw edge. So now we can baste this in place. I'm going to baste right along the same basting stitch that I used for my zipper. So let's go ahead and baste this in place now. Alright, so I've just went ahead again. I just basted right on top of the same basting stitch that I did for the zipper. Now we can double check and make sure that we like the way everything looks, that everything is nice and smooth, everything stayed even while we were stitching. And if you're happy with everything, now we can go back and do a permanent stitch. So put your stitch length back on your 2.5 regular stitch. We can back stitch at the beginning and stitch all the way, again staying on your same basting stitch to your small dot that you transferred and back stitched there. So let's go ahead and do our permanent stitch now. Now that we have our permanent stitch in, the next step we're going to do is we're going to lap our left over the front like so. So this is your front here. Just going to take my left, making sure that I have the fly turned to the inside is still pressed. I'm going to lay my left right over the right, just like so. I'm going to take a look to make sure that everything is nice and flat and smooth like I want. And now we're going to baste. We're going to baste this folded edge right over the zipper, making sure that we match up the centers. I'm going to grab some pins and pin it in place. So now that we have it pinned, we can just go and do a basting stitch. Again, we're just doing a basting stitch right here so you can baste from the top down to your large circle. Now that we have it basted in place, your front pant should look like this, and as you can see, everything is nice and smooth. So that's why we did it that method. That way you can take a look and make sure that you like everything before we do the permanent stitching, and you know that when it closes up, everything is going to close nicely. So we're going to flip to the inside, and now we're going to tack down the other portion of the zipper to the facing here. So this side of the zipper is not tacked down. So now we can go to the sewing machine. You can baste it if you'd like. I'm just going to place some pins into my right facing so that it's out of the way. And again, working on the left side here with the facing and the zipper only, not the garment. We're just going to stitch this in place. If you like, you can baste it in place first. I'm just going to go ahead and make sure everything is nice and flat, and I'm going to stitch mine in place now. All right, now that we have stitched the zipper to the facing, I'm going to remove this pin. I'm going to place it on the outside so that I know where the pin is. And now we can do our last stitch on the front of our garment. So we're going to open everything out like so. You want to make sure that your facing is out and that it's nice and flat. We are going to do our 2 rows of stitching on the right side of the fabric. So if you need to, you can grab your pattern piece back out to transfer your stitching lines. And again, we're just going to follow along those stitching lines. You can choose to do 1 or 2. The preference is yours. If you're making jeans, you may want to do 2. If you're just making a nice pair of pants, and you just may want to do 1. You have the option to do both or just do 1, but just follow along with your stitching line right here along the front of your pant. Okay, I've done 1 of the rows of the stitching along the front. Again, you can do both rows depending on the garment that you're making. I think for this type of pant and this fabric, 1 stitching line is enough. But again, if you're making denim, 2 would definitely be great, or even a twill. Those would be fantastic to have both of the stitching. Now that we have it done, we can take out our basting stitch right here along the front. So go ahead and grab your seam ripper and just remove that basting stitch. Okay, I have removed my basting stitch, and as you can see, my fly is nice and flat. Just going to remove some more of the loose threads, and now let's check out our zipper here. On the inside, we have a nice, clean, and beautiful front fly zipper. So now let's go ahead and finish it up on the inside of our pant. And what we want to do is grab the fly and the facings. We're just going to tack these together down here at the bottom. You can do it by hand by doing 2 or 3 tacks, or by your sewing machine just by going back and forth a few times. Once we have this tacked in place, you can create a new zipper stop by doing a zigzag stitch over your zipper coils, or you can use a needle and thread and just go back and forth over the coils to create a new stop, and then you can trim away the excess. I am going to set my stitch to a button setting as though I'm sewing on a button. That's going to drop my feed dog so that it's not pushing the zipper through. And I'm just going to go back and forth a few times over the zipper teeth to shorten it. Okay, I've tacked my fly to my facing along the inside, and I also shortened my zipper. So now we are all done with our front fly zipper, and we can move on to work with our back pattern pieces. To get started, we're going to grab our back pattern pieces. Pattern piece number 11, you should have cut out 2. And the first thing that I'm going to do is go all the way along my pocket edge, stitching on the 5/8 of an inch seam line. That's going to give me a guide to help fold and turn in everything so that I know that my pockets are folded in correctly. This is totally optional. You can definitely just get a seam gauge and measure up your 5/8 of an inch and press it in place. But I do like doing the stitch. So again, I'm just going to stitch all the way along the top, along the sides and the bottom of the pockets at a 5/8 of an inch on the seam line. And that's going to help me just press everything in nice and crisp. Now that we have it pressed out, you can open out the sides here, and we can stitch right across the top edge of the pocket, creating a narrow hem. So right up here with your raw edges, you can fold in 1/4 of an inch, press that in place, and then stitch right along the upper edge along the fold to create a narrow hem. Or if you have yours serged like mine, then you can just stitch right across here on the 5/8 of an inch seam line. So go ahead and just stitch your 5/8 of an inch narrow hem right along the top of your pocket now. Okay, I've gone ahead and stitched along the top of my pocket. The next step is to attach them to the back of our pant, but I like to wait until my pants is pretty much done before I put them on. I want to make sure that I have my placement correct and that everything fits on my body correctly. If you go ahead and put your pockets on now following the markings, they could need to be adjusted. So again, I always like to wait so that I can try on my pants and then pin my pocket to my pant in the right placement for my body. So I'm going to put these to the side. If you do want to go ahead and pin yours on, maybe you know for a fact that the pockets are going to fit, then you can just grab your back pattern pieces. You can find your markings that you transferred, and you just want to go ahead and stitch around your pocket doing an edge stitch and a top stitch. An edge stitch is done really close to the edge of the pocket, and a top stitch is done 1/4 of an inch away from the edge stitch. So again, if you are ready to go ahead and place yours on, you should have transferred some markings off of your back pattern piece. You want to match those up to your pocket, and again, you're going to do an edge stitch and a top stitch. I'm going to put mine to the side for later, and I'm going to get started working on the back pattern piece. The first thing that we're going to do is transfer our dart. If your dart legs have disappeared, you can go ahead and retrace them. I laid my tissue paper back over and transferred my dot. At the bottom, I had already transferred little snips to the dart legs, and so I like to just grab a ruler and match up the little snip to the point of the dart, and I transfer my marking. I'm going to stitch up my darts now, and to do that I'm going to bring my dart legs together. I'm going to grab a pin, and I'm going to pin through one dart leg, making sure that I go through the other like so, and I'm going to pin that in place. I'm going to do that for the whole dart leg up to the point, making sure that everything is matching up even for the dart legs. So just like we did for the front leg dart, we're going to back stitch at the beginning and we're going to go all the way to the end. And instead of back stitching here, we're going to leave thread tails and tie a knot to secure our dart in place. You want to pin out your other dart the same way. Okay, now that we have our darts sewn, I have both of my darts sewn in place, and I've pressed them to one side. It doesn't matter which side you prefer to press it toward. Just make sure that you press your darts going to one side. So here are both of my darts here. So now the next step is to go ahead and stitch on our yoke. You want to grab your yoke pattern piece, which is pattern piece number 12. You should have transferred some notches. We want to match those up. So you want to open that out, right side's facing like so, right side's facing like so. I'm going to grab my pins and I'm going to match up my notches. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and stitch at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. You want to back stitch at the beginning and at the end, all the way along the seam here. Once we have it sewn, you want to trim your seam allowance. After you have it trimmed, you can press your yoke going up toward the seam allowance like so, and then we're going to do a row of top stitching. Top stitching is done 1/4 of an inch away from the seam. So again, press it up and then we'll do a row of top stitching. All right, once you have your yoke stitched on, now we can go ahead and stitch our inner leg seam. As you can see, I've gone ahead and finished my inner legs and my crotch and center seam with my serger. And so now with right side spacing, I'm just going to lay the front over the back like so. And I'm going to pin, matching up my notches. And again, we're just pinning down the inner leg seam for both legs. So we just want to go ahead and grab some pins, match up your notches, and pin those in place. Okay, now that we have our inner leg seams sewn, you want to go ahead and press your seam open flat. I have pressed both of mine open flat here. And so now we're going to place them right sides facing so we can stitch the remaining of our center seam together. So with right sides facing, you can trim away any excess threads that you have as well. I'm going to match up the inner leg seams here, pin those in place. Once you have your seam pinned, we can go to the sewing machine. We want to stitch it at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then we can stitch close to the second stitching inside the seam allowance right here in the curve, just to add a little bit more reinforcement to our seam. But first, let's go ahead and do our 5/8 of an inch seam now. Okay, once we have our center back sewn, this is what mine looks like here. You just want to open up your seam and press it flat. Now, if you are making it out of denim and you want more of a denim look, you can press your seam going toward one side, going all the way to the front of the crotch to match up with the stitching curve. Again, if you look at a pair of jeans, you can be able to see the stitching that I'm referring to. But if you're just making a pair of pants like I am, you could just press your seam open flat. But again, if you want more of the denim look, then I would recommend keeping your seams together, pressing them toward one side, and then you can do a row of top stitching going all the way down your center back seam, connecting to the front. Now that we have it sewn, you can go ahead and finish your side seams now if you want, or you can stitch them and finish them together. I'm going to go ahead and finish my seams, and that way I can stitch them and press them open flat. So go ahead and finish yours, or you can just pin it together and then stitch all the way down the side seams at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now that we have our side seams sewn, you want to go ahead and give them a nice press. So I pressed mine open flat. You can see I finished off my edges. Now we can put this to the side and grab our carriers. For your carriers, you want to fold your pattern piece in half along the fold line. Give that a really good press. And then when you open it out, you want to fold in both raw edges toward that center fold. So once it's folded and pressed it, then you can open out the edges and fold it to the fold that's in the center. And then from here, after you give that a press, then you will press it and fold it onto itself so that you have a really clean carrier like so. And then you can go to the sewing machine. You're going to stitch really close to the folded pressed edge. And you can stitch again on the other side just so you have 2 rows of stitches. I've done this one right here, and as you can see, I have 2 rows of stitching on this side. It may be hard to see, but I have done a stitch over here and I've done a stitch on this side. Once you have it stitched, we're going to cut our carrier piece into 5 pieces measuring 3.5 inches. Once you have your carrier pieces cut, let's go ahead and baste them onto the pan. All right, to baste on our carriers, the first 2 are going to go right here in line with the pleats on the front. You should have transferred some markings too, so just pull out your pattern piece and take another look at your markings. I'm just going to grab one here, match up the raw edge, and pin in place. For the back, you should have transferred some markings. I have 2 dots right here, so I'm just going to line up one over here with that dot and pin that in place. Same thing for the other one. And the 5th one goes to the center. Okay, once we have it pinned, we're going to go ahead and baste the upper raw edges of the carrier in place. And then at the large circle that we transferred for the carrier, we're going to stitch right across that large circle onto the carrier. So after you have it basted at your large circle, you just want to stitch right across the large circle, tacking down the carrier. Okay, I have my carrier stitched on, and I also stitched across right at the large circle, so your carriers should all be tacked on. Now we want to go back to the sewing machine and do a row of stay stitching right across the edge between the fly opening. Stay stitching is done 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, so just do that to keep everything intact and from stretching out as we get ready to install the waistband. To get started on the waistband, first you want to go ahead and fuse the interfacing to your waistband pieces. You should have cut out 2 right front, 2 left fronts, and 2 backs on the fold, and you should have cut out one of interfacing for each. So these here are my waistband pieces that are not interfaced, and these are interfaced. As you can see, I've trimmed away the corners of the interfacing right here along the front, and I fused the fusible interfacing onto the pattern pieces. I stitched them together, matching up the side seams, and I do recommend that you look at the diagram just so you make sure that you have the right facing piece, especially if there is not a clear front and back to your fabric. You can easily mix up which ones need to be pinned together and stitched. So once you have them sewn along the sides, you want to go ahead and fold up 5/8 of an inch along the lower edge like I've done here, and then you can trim that down to 3/8 of an inch. So this is my interfaced waistband pieces, and this is the uninterfaced waistband pieces. I've done the same thing, matched them up along the side seams, stitched it in place at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. I did not fold up anything down here and trim. This is how this one looks. I just pressed open my side seams. So now let's go ahead and pin our uninterfaced waistband onto our pants. Okay, so here's my pants, and I'm just going to start pinning in place. Now what you don't want to do is just grab your waistband like so. You have it right size facing and put it over here. As you can see, this is not the right waistband side. The waistband actually gets pinned like this, so the curved edge is going up to the waistband. So as you can see, this side fits here. This is what we want. So match up your side seams on your waistband as well as your pant. I'm going to open up my side seam here, and I'm going to pin it in place. All right, now that we have it pinned, we can go ahead and stitch this in place at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then once we have it stitched, we can trim down our seam. Let's go ahead and stitch it in place now. Okay, I have my waistband sewn on. Now I'm just going to trim down my seam here. Now that we have trimmed it, we can go ahead and press our waistband up toward our seam allowance. So press everything going up. All right, now that we have pressed the waistband and it's facing up, we can go ahead and grab the interface waistband and place it right over top, like so. I'm going to pin the opening edges here, and I'm just going to pin along the top of the waistbands all the way around. All right, now that we have the facing pinned on, we're going to go ahead and stitch. We are going to stitch here, closing up the front opening. So you just want to make sure that you line up this so that it closes nice and smooth when we get ready to flip it right side out. You want everything to be nice and smooth and in line here with your fly front here. And then we can pivot and stitch all the way across the top edge, and then do the exact same thing over here, stitching down to close up the front opening. Alright, so I have my facing stitched on, and I forgot to mention that I do like to grab my ruler and just place it here to make sure that I am stitching straight up here from the fly opening. I want everything to be nice and even, so then again, once I flip everything out, that it looks nice and smooth and clean on the edge like this. So I like to just transfer a quick marking as a guide so I know exactly where I'm starting. I don't want to be too far over and definitely too far in. So that's just something that I like to do. Now we can go ahead and trim away our seam allowance like so. Trim away the corners and just go all the way around trimming the seam. Now that we have the seam allowance trim, you can give it a press if you like, pressing, making sure that you have your seam allowance going up. For me, I'm going to go and do a row of understitching. I love doing understitching on facings. So I'm just going to do understitching really close to this edge here so that everything folds in nice and smooth toward the inside. Okay, I have my row of understitching done here. So now I can just turn everything toward the inside, poke out my corners so that everything is nice and smooth like so. Loving the way that this looks. So we can turn it to the inside and go ahead and give everything a really good press. Okay, now that we have it pressed in place, it should look like this. So on the inside, everything should be looking really nice and clean. So now you have the option to do a slip stitch to close your waistband, or if you like, you can do a stitch in a ditch. I prefer a stitch in a ditch, so that's what I'm going to do. For the stitch in the ditch, you want to make sure that you have the folded edge of your facing just a little bit past your seam, and we pin into our stitch, our seam. So when you pin, you want to make sure that the pin goes through and catches the folded edge so that when you stitch, you know that the edge is secure. I think I'm going to put my label right here. I think that'd be really cool, something different. I'm just going to continue pinning. Again, I'm pinning right here into the seam, right here into the seam. That's where I'm pinning, making sure that the folded press edge is just a little bit past the seam so that it catches. Okay, and just continue pinning it all the way around. Okay, I have everything pinned. Again, you pin on the right side of your fabric, making sure that you catch the inner pressed fold of the facing. And we're going to stitch right here in the ditch. This is called a stitch in the ditch. So you want to stitch right here into the seam. Let's do that now. Okay, once you have stitched your facing down along the inside of your garment, now we can go ahead and zip everything up. The next thing for us to do is to go ahead and tack down our carrier. So you just want to fold over 5/8 of an inch and then pin it to the upper edge of our waistband like so. And we're just going to do an edge stitch for our carriers. All right, now that we have our waistband attached, we have 3 more steps, and that is to put your buttonhole onto your left opening. We all have different machines, so please refer to your manual to see how to stitch on a buttonhole, and just transfer your marking from your tissue paper if it's no longer there. After you have your buttonhole on, then you want to go ahead and stitch on your button onto the right opening edge at the circle marking. Then the last step is to do your hem. Our hem allowance is 1 inch, so you can fold up 1 inch and then fold in 1/4 of an inch, fold that in, and then press your hem in place, and you will be all done with your pants from my pattern ME2002 View C. Well, that is all for the video, and I really do hope that you all enjoyed it. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Tag me, Brittany J. Jones, over on Instagram, as well as Know Me Patterns. If you make this, I would absolutely love to see it and reshare it. Thank you all so much again for your support of my pattern, for your support of Know Me. It means so much to all of us. Blessings, everyone. Bye.